Oh. This is where we got to on Friday, and we'll talk a little bit about carbon electrolyte sports drinks. The next chapter is looking at fluid intake, and so it also covers sports drinks. So we'll come back to this idea in the next chapter. There is quite a bit. I'm going to concentrate mostly on the carbohydrate idea, or at least the technical movement of the water, and then we'll, as I said, we'll look more at it in the next chapter. Okay, so sports drinks that have both carbs and electrolytes in them have a dual purpose, all right? So we've looked at the fact that when we are depleting our carbohydrate store, our glycogen stores, we see fatigue. And particularly in endurance, long distance events, people who compete in those will sometimes talk about hitting the wall. And when you hit the wall, that means that your carbohydrate store is completely depleted. You have to switch back to using fats as an energy source to complete the event, okay? Now, that's okay, except the problem is if you go back to fats, you have to slow down, right? So if you watch the end of a marathon, you'll quite often see people literally just staggering to the finish line, all right? They'll do anything and sometimes you'll even see people crawl over the finish line. That's because they've got no glycogen left in the liver or in the muscles, right? We've got this finite store. So part of the reason for the drink is the carbohydrate that's in the drink is to try to provide an external source of glucose, of carbohydrate, so that you don't completely deplete your glycogen stores, okay? So particularly towards the end of a race, you'll see people taking either those little jelly cubes or a sport drink. And then the electrolytes and the water in the drink are there to help maintain ion balance and function of your heart and your muscles, because they all need electrolytes, right? And you're losing a lot of water in sweat, so you're trying to replace water to prevent dehydration. Okay, so how well these sports drinks work depends on a couple of items, right? The first is called gastric emptying, and that's the rate at which the drink passes through the stomach and into the small intestine, which is where the water gets absorbed and the electrolytes get absorbed, all right? So if gastric emptying slows down, which happens when we're doing very high intensity exercise or we're dehydrated, if it slows down, then that means we're not getting the water and the electrolytes into the small intestine and the carbohydrate into the small intestine as quickly, right? So that slows delivery of the whole point of the drink, all right? So that rate, that gastric emptying rate is important. The formulation of the drink is important. So which types of carbohydrate does it have in the drink? What's the concentration of that carbohydrate in the drink? All right. So, because what we want is to increase the absorption rate. Okay. And then the third item that dictates how well the drinks are going to do their job is this horrible word, osmolality of fluid. Osmolality stands for the ratio of the solutes that are in the fluid to the fluid, right? So what's the ratio of solute to fluid? Okay, and that's important. They have a little saying, excuse me, sorry, I gobbled lunch so quickly to get back here. Okay, they have a little saying in your textbook, water follows solute. Okay, and so I'm going to draw a diagram. They've got this picture in the book that I've got on the slide here, but I'm going to try and draw something, she says, to help. I hope it will help. Let's see. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Professor.
You can tell me if this helps. Okay, here we go. Oops. All right, so let's say that this side is the small intestine. And on the right side is body cells. So let's make X's are going to be solute, so carbohydrate, electrolytes, things like that, and the O's are going to be water molecules, all right? So let's say, oops, I don't need that, I don't need this. Let's say we've got, so we've got a drink. Sorry, this is looking a bit messy, but hopefully you'll get the idea. All right, so example one, we've got a drink passing from the stomach into the small intestine that has a lower level of solute than the body's cells do. All right, so this is called a hypotonic solution. Okay, and because water follows solute, what happens here is the water will get dragged out of the small intestine into the body's cells. So it's good for hydrating, right? And my way of thinking of it, they say water follows solute. What I think of is, why learn another trick, right? We already know high to low. And on this side, we've got high water versus low water on the other side. So I think of it that way. The water goes from the small intestine into the body's cells because there's more water on this side of the membrane, right? Another situation that can occur is you've got a drink that is hypertonic. And so when this happens, that means that there's more solute in the drink than there is in the cells. Right? And over here we have less solute. Okay? So this is a problem then. Oh, let me write this thing. So this drink is hypertonic. It has more solute in it than the body's cells have. And then this becomes a problem because it draws the water out of the cells into the small intestine. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, and I'm glad that we do more on the drinks in the next chapter because it kind of gives us another chance to examine this. All right. What they're trying to tell us is that the makeup, the formulation of these drinks is really important, depending on what the job is we want them to do. Right? And if we want them to serve as a hydration mechanism, then they have to be hypotonic. If they're hypertonic, they're going to serve as a dehydration mechanism, which typically isn't a good thing in the middle of a long event, right? So that's how I interpret what they're trying to tell us in that chapter, in that little bit there. Then another important point that they bring up here is that this ratio, this osmolality of the fluid depends upon the number of pieces of solute that's in the fluid, not on the size of the pieces of solute. So that can be useful because that means that I can use a carbohydrate that has a larger molecule, but it doesn't change the osmolality as long as I've got the same number of molecules. That provides more carbohydrate then to the bloodstream to use for energy. So, you know, is it glucose, is it sucrose, is it fructose, is it lactate, right? There's all these different sugars that can be carbohydrates that can be used in these drinks. So the larger the molecule of carbohydrate, as long as I've got the ratio correct, it's not going to change whether the drink is hypotonic or hypertonic. It's not the size of the molecule, it's the number of the molecules, okay? So they're trying to talk to us about, you still have to be careful though about these sugars. Like, what is the drink made of? You should know what's in there. Which sugar are they using? Fructose has been shown to have some issues that can lead to cardiovascular disease in the long-term extreme situations. So fructose apparently, and I don't know the mechanism of how this works, and I keep meaning to find out because my sister is diabetic, so she's already got cardiovascular issues, and her favorite gin and tonic is flavored with fructose. So it has an inflammatory effect on the insides of the arteries. And again, I don't know how, I don't know what that mechanism is, but it's been shown to have this inflammatory effect, and so it can cause more problems towards cardiovascular disease. Well, when you look at some of these sports drinks, the carbohydrate that they use is high fructose corn syrup, which is just tons of this molecule that causes inflammation in the cells, right? So probably not a good choice, I'm thinking, is what they're trying to tell us, all right? The World Health Organization says that your calorie intake, your dietary intake should be less than 10% of added sugars. And the textbook states that many athletes take way more than 10% of added sugars because of these drinks. So that's something to consider, I think. You shouldn't have more than 8 to 10% of carbohydrate in the drink. Most of the ones on the market apparently are somewhere between 6 and 8%. So if you're doing a marathon or a long distance bike ride, then you want about 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per hour. And that's been shown in the research to prolong endurance exercise. Right? So it means that you can go for longer before you hit that fatigue window. Right? I do have, if there are any soccer people who are interested, I do have a Journal of Science and Medicine in Sport article on carbohydrate hydration strategies during a soccer match. Just in case anybody is interested in that, I can scan that in for you. Okay. All right, so I said we were going to look at carbs, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals. Okay, so on to our proteins. All right, our carbs were 45 to 65% of our calorie intake. Okay, somewhere in that range. A normal person would be aiming for 45–50% or so. Athletes need more carbs, and that's why we have that bigger range. When we look at protein, we have a similar situation. No one who's doing an office job and is low active needs 35% of their diet to be protein, right? The typical amount would be 10 to 15%, okay? So again, this large range is more to accommodate different populations, okay? I don't typically like the RDA numbers. I think they're not useful to use in the same way that a percentage is. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But I do think it's important to note with the protein, because in this country, in the West in general, but, well, no, that's not true, because not in certain countries in Europe, but in the UK, in France, in America, probably Canada, we do eat way too much protein in general, okay? So the recommended daily allowance here is 0.8 of a gram per kilogram per day for a normal person. Okay, so this average, non-existent, normal person that we keep whittering on about, all right? So 0.8 of a gram per kilogram per day. So if we actually took the time to calculate that, it's likely that a lot of us eat way more protein than that, okay? Now, if we're an athlete, the research suggests that depending on what type of athlete you are, that you're going to need anywhere from 1 to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day. So quite a lot more than a regular person, right? And that's because every time we train, every time we do something, we do this micro damage to the muscle that we then have to repair to maintain function to keep training, right? So protein synthesis for an athlete is a daily issue, right? So we have to repair that skeletal muscle damage, and we have to have additional proteins and amino acids available for building muscle, depending, again, what type of athlete we are, right? So there's this wiggle room, this extra amount for athletes. But again, it's important, I think, to consider the grams per kilogram per day, right? Because we'll see that you can do some serious damage, okay? So, at the moment, the research would suggest that more than 1.7, and depending on the resource you're looking at, I have seen that number as 1.8, but still, it's under 2 grams per kilogram per day, okay? So in our textbook, the research that they're using there suggests that more than 1.7 grams per kilogram per day doesn't provide any additional advantage. All right? It takes a long time to break down protein, to metabolize it. It takes a long, long time to build muscle tissue. So to use that protein in conjunction with an appropriate training program to grow muscle tissue. Right? Remember that we're not adding extra fibers, we're trying to grow the muscle cells that we have there. Okay? It takes a long time, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of training before you start to see a little bit of a difference. All right? So we have to be careful, because that extra protein that doesn't get used then has to be flushed out of the body. And once you hit 2 grams per kilogram per day, then we're looking at a health risk, because the amount of work that the kidneys have to do to flush out the byproducts of protein metabolism becomes overwhelming, and the kidneys can get damaged. Once they're damaged, they don't become undamaged because you stop eating a lot of protein, right? Once they're damaged, they're damaged. So now you've got to live with that for the rest of your life and hopefully not need a kidney transplant, right? So it's pretty dramatic, the health risk that's involved here by eating too much protein, which is my concern, you know, when we come back here to this 0.8 grams per kilogram, and we've got all these flighty actresses and silly people in the media going, oh, high protein diets, yay, I've never felt this good, I've never been this lean. You know, that just is dangerous in my view, right? And I'm not sure I believe it anyway, to be quite frank, because high protein diets, as we're about to talk about, are not that cool after all. So let me show you something that drives me bonkers. Share application. So having looked at that last slide, all right, with that information about what a regular person should be eating protein-wise, okay, this is what we get shoved down their throats. Can you see that? Yes, good. Okay. So, this is what makes me mad, right? Because it's all about money. It isn't about people's health. It's not about trying to get people fitter or leaner or anything like that, right? It's all about money. So here's this young mum with 2 kids. She's trying to get to school and she's frying an egg in the car, right? So I guess the picture is trying to tell us that she at least didn't have time for breakfast. Hopefully this is not representing the fact that the children didn't get breakfast, because that would be bad. All right, so I'm going to assume it's representing that mum didn't get breakfast because she was getting the kids ready for school, okay? So we have this in nice bright red big letters, okay? And we have a picture. And down here, again, in red capital letters, albeit a little bit smaller, is this statement: energy for every day. Now, based on what we did earlier in the semester on energy systems, do we use protein for energy? What do you think, Chris? Can you remember?
I don't think. I think it's a marathon normally.
Yeah, we don't, right? On the whole, if I run a marathon, somewhere around 6 or 7% of the energy I need for a 4-hour marathon comes from protein. If I go down to the gym for 45 minutes, I don't use protein. If I go for a walk at the trail for an hour, I don't use protein for energy. We use protein to build things, right? So this is completely misleading. The problem is they're not. Can we use protein for energy? Yes, right? And that's the loophole. The human body can use protein, break it down to acetyl-CoA, and feed it into Krebs cycle. Do we use protein as energy? No. Certainly she doesn't, right? So this is completely misleading, because they want her to buy their protein drink rather than eat her egg. She's better off eating her egg, right? It's a complete scam. So I actually have support that it's basically a scam. High protein diets were initially created to try to help obese people lose weight, okay? Because many people in obesity have insulin control issues, and so carbohydrate exacerbates those insulin control issues, and so they use higher protein diets for some of that population, right? They are not supposed to be done long term. They're not supposed to be a permanent way of eating, right? They're a short-term kickstart for a weight loss program for someone who is obese. There's also some research that indicates certain brain malfunctions can be helped with a high-protein diet. So the book mentions the fact that there's some work done with people who have epileptic seizures, and if they use a diet that is higher in protein, it seems to decrease the number of seizures that they have. We don't really know why, right? So there's a time and a place for a high-protein diet. Do people who take a high-protein diet lose weight on a scale? Yes, because if it's a high-protein diet, then it's got less carbohydrate than normal, which means I'm going to lose water weight very quickly on a high-protein diet. But I didn't lose fat mass, right? It takes time to kick in and lose fat mass. These high-protein diets are not suitable for the kinds of people, you know, these TV stars and people like that we see on telly or on the red carpet, if you watch the red carpet for anything. You know, these kinds of people that say, oh, I've been on this high-protein diet and I feel amazing. Well, if I'm not taking in enough carbohydrate, that means I'm going to feel sluggish, I'm going to feel fatigued, my legs are going to feel heavy, right? It takes a lot of time for your body to adjust to a high-protein or a high-fat diet. So I would question how great they feel. They probably feel great because they're doing a load of training, right? And the definition of a high-protein diet probably still has loads of broccoli and cauliflower and carrots and zucchini and all these other things that are carbohydrate. I think that people mistake carbohydrate for starchy foods, rice, potatoes, pasta, bread. And they say, I'm not eating rice, potatoes, pasta, or bread, therefore I'm on a low carbohydrate diet, but I've got this piece of salmon that's absolutely swallowed up with a salad. Well, what do you think the salad is? It's not fat, and it isn't protein. There's only one other food group, right? So I think that there's a lot of, again, misrepresentation in the media about what a high-protein diet really is, right? A dietitian would not recommend a high-protein diet to a typical person or an athlete, because if it's a high-protein diet, chances are there's a lot of animal meat in there, and that's high in saturated fats, which means that puts you at higher risk for heart disease. Okay? If it's got a lot of fats in it to replace the carbohydrates, again, that puts you at risk for heart disease. Then we've got this kidney disease issue with too much protein. So there's no way that a clinically qualified dietitian would use a high-protein diet unless you were one of these particular populations, right? Now, At the moment, the big thing is this keto diet, right? Which is supposedly a high-protein diet. But on the keto diet, I think that you're looking at less than 15% of your calories a day coming from carbohydrate, right? Well, that means that 85% of your calories are coming from proteins and fats, okay? So your muscle glycogen and your liver glycogen are going to deplete very quickly in that situation. People who support that diet say that's the whole point, right? We want to drive the body into using stored fat as an energy source instead of carbohydrate. But that takes time. It takes several weeks for the body to make that adjustment. So you've got this period of time where your glucose and glycogen levels are very, very low before your body kicks into using fat as a preferential source for energy. Okay? That can't be good for an athlete. I'm not sure that's good for anybody. It certainly can't be good. You don't have time to give up 2 or 3 weeks of your training plan while your body adapts to using fats as an energy source, right? And it can adapt to using fats as an energy source, but that doesn't change the size of a fat molecule. It still takes time, right? You're not going to be able to generate ATP as quickly as you can from carbohydrate. So there's a lot of issues around this. People who support high-protein diets say that some of the literature is skewed because they've used a high-protein diet that's high in animal meats and therefore high in fats. And so that skews the results somewhat. And that there is research out there, I'm not a fan of this, but there is research out there that says if you take a high-protein diet and the protein you use is soybeans and other vegetable proteins, that you see quite beneficial impacts on blood lipid levels, for example, right? So it's very complicated, I think. And I'm not sure what benefit it is to the majority of people, right? Most people need to think about our seesaw idea, our energy balance. We need to eat a few less calories and move a little bit more and be patient, and over the long run we'll be more healthy, right? Most of these fat diets are a quick fix because people can't be patient enough to do the job properly in a healthy way, right? This diet is no good if once you've lost your 10 pounds or whatever it is you want to lose, and was it 10 pounds of fat anyway, who knows, right? And then you go back to eating the way you always ate, you put the 10 pounds back on, right? The only honest way to maintain weight loss and health and wellness is a change in lifestyle. And that's the problem, right? The people that sell this stuff know that most people don't want to change their lifestyle, right? Even though the change is necessarily quite small. It doesn't have to be a great big whacking complete overhaul of your life, right? Just little dinks here and there. Then I have one more media item to show you. And again, you know, it's possible I'm overdoing it, but this, I honestly think that this is a problem, right? I don't think that this is, it's not safe and it's not healthy. So here's this chap who at some point was a Mr. Olympia. I don't have a problem, you know, that's his choice. I suspect, looking at the size of him, that he took either growth hormone or steroids. But that, again, is his choice, right? What I find really irritating about this little piece that came out of just, I don't know what magazine, OK magazine, right, is this comment down here, right? Less carbs, more protein. If you eat more protein, you lose weight and look awesome automatically. What a load of poppycock. Really? You don't look awesome automatically by losing weight. You look awesome by exercising and developing good muscle tone, right? It's just such a load of nonsense. And again, it's dangerous because the types of magazines that these comments show up in are not magazines that are being read by someone who has any education or any deep knowledge about nutrition, right? And this guy is held up as an expert just because he's won a couple of competitions. And now you've got regular people thinking, oh yeah, I can just eat more protein and I'll look great. Why didn't he say go out and exercise 5 days a week and you'll look awesome? At least that would be healthy, right? It's just drives me nuts, as you can tell, I'm sure. All right. Okay, so okay, types of amino acids. Oops, those are down the wrong way. Did I skip I did, sorry, I skipped one. Let's look at protein supplementation first. That's what we want. All right. So having done my rant, when is it appropriate to use protein supplements? Okay. So mostly, I would say only for athletes. All right, although there is some research that suggests women who are postmenopausal should take more proteins to try to maintain muscle mass and bone density. But really, the average person, even if they're relatively active and they're trying to exercise most days, don't do enough work to warrant additional protein on top of what they're already eating in their regular meals. Bearing in mind the type of meals, particularly that we eat in this country, right? So, when we're resistance training, the goal of resistance training is to increase fat-free mass, right? So, the research shows us that if we take protein, and I think they prefer a protein and carb mix, but that might be post-exercise. If we take some protein just before we go into the weight room, or within a 3-hour window after we leave the weight room. And that definitely is better if it's mixed with carbs. Then we see much increased protein synthesis. So that means that the damage that we caused in the weight room during the exercise session, we see faster protein synthesis to mend that damage, right? And then depending on the type of program we're doing, if we're doing a muscle building program, we'll see improved muscle size, right? So, depending on the goal of the program, it warrants considering a protein supplement before or after, right? After is the repair phase, before it seems to increase amino acid use in the muscle. Now, it doesn't have to be a protein shake, right? So again, I sound like a broken record, I guess, but again, these protein shakes are great when you're a college athlete and coach is paying for them, right? And he gives them to you for free. But they're expensive, and you could use a cheese sandwich, or peanut butter and celery, or whatever your preference, you know, a handful of almonds and some soy milk, right? So it doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying that the protein supplementation has to be a protein bar or a protein shake. We're just looking at the fact that if we add protein, particularly if we add protein and carbs, we see increased protein synthesis and increased glycogen synthesis, which is beneficial to someone that wants to then go back to the gym and train again the next day, right? So, but it takes about 6 weeks to start seeing increases in muscle mass, even if you supplement proteins, all right? So with resistance training, there's quite a lot of positives with this prior protein before training and protein after training, okay? With endurance training, because the goal is different, right? With endurance training, normally what we're worried about, we're more concerned about recovery so that we can train again. You know, if it's good going to the gym and training for a couple of hours and lifting, but I'm not lifting for a couple of hours, right? I do a set, I take a break, I do another set, I go and do, I mix sets, so maybe I'm not taking a break, but I'm doing a different muscle group, okay? So I'm not training my legs for 2 hours without stopping. But if I'm an endurance athlete, this is different, right? They do run for 2 hours or ride a bike for 2 hours, right? Their legs are working constantly for 2 hours. It's a different picture. So here, we're looking at a recovery situation rather than a building per se, right? So I haven't seen anything that suggests that prior ingestion of supplements is beneficial. We're looking at post-exercise. What's my window post-exercise? You've got about 2 hours. If you can get protein and carbs in within that 2 hours, regardless of which type of training, you're going to see the highest level of protein synthesis and glycogen synthesis. All right? So some studies have indicated that using this post-exercise protein and carb reduces muscle soreness, but it's not equivocal across it. It's not balanced across all the research, so not everybody indicates that. But yeah, protein and carb, right? So it can't just be the banana. It has to be the banana with peanut butter on it, or a cheese sandwich on whole wheat bread, or, right, can I find a way? Now this is when shakes might come in useful, right? Because for some people, when they train very hard, particularly if it's hot, when they have finished training, the thought of trying to eat something solid is off the table, right? There's no way, I can't put any solid food in my stomach for a few hours yet. That's when it might be useful to use one of these shakes. Because you've got to get the protein and carb in, preferably within 2 hours. And that 2-hour window might not be comfortable for someone to eat solid food. Does that make sense? Ish.
Yeah, ish.
Ish. All right, where am I? Uh-oh, I'm over time and I still have one more slide. Can you manage one more?
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay. I talk too much, Chris. You should throw something at me. Okay, so just a quick rundown of amino acids. We have 2 types of amino acids. We have essential. They're called essential because our body cannot synthesize them for itself, so we have to take them within our dietary intake somehow. Then we have a whole group of amino acids that are non-essential because if we don't get them in our diet, we're able to build them using other amino acids, okay? So these 3 that have the BCCA by the side, isoleucine, leucine, and valine. BCCA stands for branched chain something aminos, and I can't remember what the second C is for. They are the primary stimulators for muscle protein synthesis. So you'll often see those terms on the tin of protein powder, right? They're important substrates for oxidation and ATP production. So, and then on Friday, we'll have a quick look at which types of protein. So if I'm going to use a protein shake, what type of protein do I want in there? Do I want whey? Do I want soy? Do I want casein? Right? What kind of proteins do we want in these shakes? Okay? So we'll come back and have a quick look at that before we move on to triglycerides on Friday. No, wait, what day is it today? It's Monday. On Wednesday. There, I thought it was Wednesday already. No, yeah, so we'll finish off this chapter on Wednesday. Okay?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you for hanging on, I appreciate it. And I got everybody's physical activity logs back over the weekend, finally. So everybody's got those. If you have questions about any of the comments that I've made or anything like that, then I have office hours this afternoon and Wednesday and Thursday, or make an appointment with me. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for hanging on, Chris. Have a good afternoon.
You too, Professor. Bye-bye.
Bye. Turn this off.